So Mr. Sam Altman just posted something on his personal blog that I think deserves our attention. That seems pretty big. I will explain towards the end why I think it's such a big deal, but first let's take a look at what it is. But the big idea here is that we're entering a new age. Just like we had the industrial age, the information age, the digital age. We had the dot-com era, the telecom era. The point is, during certain periods in history, those years would later be called something. They would be labeled as the something age. The time that we're living through right now is the very, very beginning of a new age. These years will be called something. In the past, the ages were named after the thing that was doing the growth, the thing that was being innovated, the thing that was driving progress, right? The industry, information as in PCs, the internet, software. In the digital age, we had a massive expansion of the digital economy, cloud services. So with that said, I think it's very likely that this next age, this next era will be called the intelligence age, which shockingly is also the name of Sam Altman's blog post or paper or whatever you want to call it. Now, I don't know when we're going to say that the intelligence age began. Maybe we'll say it began in 2017 with Google's paper Attention is All You Need, kind of the invention of the transformer architecture, which I think a lot of people would agree kind of kicked this off. Or maybe it was 2022, the end of 2022, the release of ChatGPT. That's when a lot of people kind of like sat up and went, whoa, this is new, this is different, right? Is this AI? Or maybe it was GPT-4, months later, whenever that got released, beginning of 2023. I don't know what we're going to say kicked it off, but I do know that we're very, very, very early on in this intelligence age. Now, really fast, it's important to understand that Sam Altman has often said things in the past that seemed outlandish. It seemed way too futuristic, way too sci-fi. There were examples of prominent people in the AI industry that would kind of say that he's not serious, that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, for example, in 2016, 2017, whenever they were founding OpenAI, he proclaimed that they're building AGI, artificial general intelligence. At the time, that was seen as nonsense, as laughable. By 2023, people were like, maybe not so much. Maybe he was right. And now, of course, more and more people are predicting that it's much, much closer than we anticipate, years away potentially. In March 2021, he wrote this blog post, Moore's Law for Everything. In it, he says, in the next 5 years, computer programs that can think will read legal documents and give medical advice. Again, this would have been laughable back then in 2021. Now, you still might not agree with what he's saying here, but more and more people are beginning to change their opinion. He says, and a recursive loop of innovation as these smart machines themselves help us make smarter machines will accelerate the revolution's pace. Again, this was kind of a sci-fi idea in 2021. If you've been paying attention to this channel, we've covered a number of papers where literally this is beginning to happen. More and more, we're relying on AI to build the next generation of AI. That's kind of what the Strawberry model is, the upcoming Orion model. A lot of work out of OpenAI and Google and NVIDIA and many, many others. Meta, Mark Zuckerberg talking about how these models can be seen as the teacher models to train other models for specific tasks. Like, this idea is a lot more acceptable now. Remember this quote? All truth passes through 3 stages. First, it's ridiculed. You think you're building AGI? Silly person. That's science fiction. Second, it's violently opposed. And I've seen a little bit of that. People get very angry when you suggest that these machines have some form of understanding or reasoning. And I've shown examples on this channel where people get kind of like violently opposed to it, or at the very least, they get very incensed, very angry if you suggest something like this. And of course, third, it's accepted as being self-evident. Yeah, of course, AGI is just around the corner. Of course, these machines can think and reason and understand. Why would you even think otherwise? We've known this all along. So just be ready for that. It's coming. And so in this post, he describes how things will unfold. And in 2021, it probably would have seemed too futuristic, too out there. You'd be like, maybe, maybe not. Right? So in 2021, he was saying software that can think and learn will do more and more of the work that people do now. Back then, the average person would probably ridicule it, say, haha, so I don't have to work anymore. That's great. I can just kick back and enjoy life. Now, more and more people are becoming a little bit more interested in what happens when they no longer will get a paycheck. And they're freaking out a little bit. By the way, Sam Altman, early 2021, kind of described in this blog post a potential solution to a lot of this. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with it. I'm just saying that some very smart people that have been aware of this coming for quite some time sat down, put their heads together and thought, what are we going to do when this thing rolls out? By the way, it wouldn't really affect them. They were the ones building it. They would probably become billionaires and trillionaires. They were more concerned about you. If you assume that this is all sincere and this is kind of like what they truly believe, but they're more concerned about the average person, what's going to happen when the value, the price, the demand for human labor drops to zero or close to it. What happens to the world? Right, and here on this page, you have, Sam Altman, Daniel Amadei, Reid Hoffman, Ilya Sutskever, and many, many other names that are in the AI or tech space that you might have heard of. So as we read this, kind of keep that in mind, that Sam Altman has been unerringly correct in his predictions for a number of years now. So when we look back at this document 5-10 years from now, could it be completely off? Could it be completely wrong? I guess, sure, maybe, but me personally, I wouldn't bet on it. And if I had to bet, I would say this is going to look a lot more prescient, a lot more accurate, a lot more like the future foretold 5-10 years from now than we might imagine reading it now. But without further ado, as they say, he begins. So this is the thing he published today. Start date 09/23/2024. Year of our Lord and all that. And he says, in the next couple decades, we will be able to do things that would have seemed like magic to our grandparents. Now, this phenomenon is not new, but it will be newly accelerated. People have become dramatically more capable over time. We can already accomplish things now that our predecessors would have believed to be impossible. And we're not more capable because of genetic change, but because we benefit from the infrastructure of society being way smarter and more capable than any of us individually. In an important sense, society itself is a form of advanced intelligence. Our grandparents and the generations that came before them built and achieved great things. They contributed to the scaffolding of human progress that we all benefit from. AI will give people tools and solve hard problems and help us add new struts to that scaffolding that we wouldn't have figured out on our own. The story of progress will continue, and our children will be able to do things we can't. And I think about that sometimes, like the young kids that are growing up now that are being born, will be born over the next 5-10 years. I have a hard time grasping what their life will even look like. What skills should they acquire? I don't even really know. That's a whole other topic, but Sam Altman continues, it won't happen all at once, but we'll soon be able to work with AI that helps us accomplish much more than we ever could without AI. Eventually, we can each have a personal AI team full of virtual experts in different areas, working together to create almost anything we can imagine. I've showcased this on the channel. Chat Dev is one video that off the top of my head shows exactly this. A team of software engineers powered by AI, each one of them GPT 3.5. You write out your idea for a software or a game and they do the rest. They design it, they code it, they test it, they troubleshoot it, make sure there's no bugs. They create a tutorial, they document all the features. The first time I saw it happening live, I was blown away. It seemed groundbreaking, and it still does. And it's only, so he continues, our children will have virtual tutors who can provide personalized instruction in any subject, in any language, at whatever pace they need. I'm pretty sure that he's referring to Bloom's 2 sigma problem here. That if this kind of green curve, that's the normal school, how school teaches various subjects. That's kind of the performance of the students. Unfortunately, how we teach kids in school isn't the most optimal, isn't the most efficient and effective way of teaching. It's 20 to 40 kids to a instructor at a predetermined pace. So if you want to go faster, you can't. You want to go slower, you can't. Also, you don't have too much one-on-one time with the instructor. If we allow mastery learning, which means you get to learn at your own pace, the performance of the kids moves up one standard deviation. The kids perform much, much better. Then if we add one-on-one tutoring, when the kid has one-on-one tutoring help that helps them at their specific case for their specific questions, that moves performance, so achievement in school, yet another standard deviation to the right. So that approach takes, normal kids and good kids and everybody and just turns everybody into what we consider, A students, super achievers. Now, normally this would not be economically viable. Right? For schools, you need one teacher, cranking out, 20 to 40 kids per class, everybody on a certain schedule. But with AI, that equation changes. So when he says we can have virtual tutors who can provide personalized instruction in any subject, in any language, at whatever pace they need, that might seem like a good, modest improvement. It's not. It's revolutionary. You would completely transform how kids learn in a massive, impactful, positive way. He continues, we can imagine similar ideas for better healthcare. The ability to create any kind of software someone can imagine and much more. We can do this for little scripts, little games, little, rudimentary software But as AI improves, the sort of complexity of software that we can create is just going to get better and better. With these new abilities, we can have shared prosperity to a degree that seems unimaginable today. In the future, everyone's lives can be better than anyone's life is now. Prosperity alone doesn't necessarily make people happy. There are plenty of miserable rich people, but it would meaningfully improve the lives of people around the world. Here's one narrow way to look at human history. I think this paragraph is very important. If you understand it, if you believe it, take the entirety of human existence throughout history. Here's one lens to view it through, right? So after thousands of years of compounding scientific discovery and technological progress, from the wheel to the engine to electricity, etc., eventually we have figured out how to melt sand, add some impurities, arrange it with astonishing precision at extraordinarily tiny scale into computer chips, run energy through it, and end up with systems capable of creating increasingly capable artificial intelligence. So after thousands of years of slowly accumulating knowledge and having that knowledge compound on itself, we came up with what might be humanity's greatest achievement. And that is, we figured out how to make sand think. We made sand think. It's kind of weird to think about, but if you truly grok what this means, if you truly understand what this means, it's kind of like when you look out at the Milky Way and see all the stars and galaxies, and you realize how tiny you are in the universe. This is kind of like that. So Sam Altman continues, this may turn out to be the most consequential fact about history so far. I agree. It is possible that we will have superintelligence in a few thousand days. It may take longer, but I'm confident we'll get there. How do we get to the next doorstep of the next leap in prosperity? In 3 words, deep learning worked. In 15 words, deep learning worked, got predictably better with scale, and we dedicated increasing resources to it. That's really it. Humanity discovered an algorithm that could really, truly learn. It could really, truly learn any distribution of data, or really the underlying rules that produce any distribution of data. This is important to understand. Google DeepMind had AlphaFold, for example. We showed it all the different structures of proteins, the 3D structure of proteins, kind of the machinery that makes life work and function. And so we showed it, here's all the ones we figured out so far. And now it's producing structures of new proteins that we haven't figured out, and it's able to predict their function. We can tell it, we want a protein that looks like this or has this sort of traits and has this sort of function, and it gives us some guesses. It's like, well, here's 5 things that could work like that. And then we test them, and they do, aka deep learning worked. It worked surprisingly well. It worked better than anyone could have imagined. It worked to a shocking degree. I downloaded his blog post so I can doodle on it. So deep learning worked to a shocking degree of precision. The more compute and data available, the better it gets at helping people solve hard problems. I find that no matter how much time I spend thinking about this, I can never really internalize how consequential this is. This is true for me as well. It's hard to understand what this means. That life and proteins and words and meaning and math and everything can be broken down into tokens. We feed those tokens as data into these neural nets that are modeled after the human brain. And with enough compute and data and certain tweaks here and there, it learns to predict how that thing works. It figures out the underlying rules that produce any distribution of data. Rules that it doesn't know. We never taught it those rules. It learns implicitly, not explicitly. It's not like we tell it how stuff works and then it learns. We give it the data that we've collected and it figures out how stuff works really fast. In this paper, Beyond Surface Statistics from Harvard, they took a model, right? And they fed it a bunch of 2D images. So 2D images are just pixels on a page. If I show you a picture of a car, this is a car, you can imagine that it's a thing in 3D space because you've seen it before. You know what 3D space looks like. But when you show an AI, 2 million images of cars, all it sees is just flat pixels on a page. It has no concept of depth, volume, or anything like that. Yet when we ask it to produce similar images of cars, when we look at how it does it, it becomes apparent that it guessed at the fact that there's a 3D world out there. It has an understanding of depth. It has some understanding of what the salient object is, of like what the subject of the picture is. What's the main thing that we're looking at, right? As they put here in the abstract, even when these models are trained purely on images without explicit depth information, right? So just basic 2D images, no extra data in terms of like the depth in the images or anything like that. It's just pixels on a flat surface, a JPEG. They, meaning the AI, the neural networks, right? They typically output coherent pictures of 3D spaces. How is that possible? And so they used linear probes this way to kind of slice into that brain as it's working on a problem to try to figure out what it's doing. And they say they find evidence that the internal activations, they have some representation of both 3D depth data and a salient object / background distinction. So like the focus of the image versus the background. So it figured out how to build 3D shapes, what 3D means, how light sources fall, right? How light and shadows, how like that whole thing works, just because we gave it a bunch of images. As Sam Altman here puts it, it learns the underlying rules that produce any distribution of data, right? So you give it a bunch of data, images, it learns the rules. It's like, okay, so here's what 3D environments look like. Here's how shadows and light work. Here's what the main image is. Here's what the background is. It learns that implicitly without us telling it, explaining it. It just learns the underlying rules, but for everything potentially, right? So it can do it for images. It can do it for life, for proteins, how life functions. And so as Sam Altman puts it, I find no matter how much time I spend thinking about this, I can never really internalize how consequential it is. Especially since right now, if you think about it, there doesn't seem to be a limit. I mean, maybe one day we'll run into some limit of how far these things will take us, or we won't, in which case any sort of mystery of the universe, as long as we can gather data about it, we can learn to understand it, learn the rules that govern it. Andrej Karpathy, in one of the interviews, I think with Lex Friedman, he kind of said this, he was kind of like hypothetically saying this. Like, this is not necessarily what he believes, but he was saying, what if someone created this universe and this universe is like a puzzle? And the goal for us is to like figure out this puzzle and kind of signal up to the person that created this whole thing, hey, we are now smart enough to figure out your puzzle. Like, we did it. And he's saying that AI might be able to help us with that. I might be misquoting him. I'll try to play a clip towards the end of exactly what he said, because it kind of like blew my mind a little bit about the scale of this. If you assume exponential growth, then where do we end with this thing, right? But he's saying there are a lot of details we still have to figure out, but it's a mistake to get distracted by any particular challenge. Deep learning works, and we will solve the remaining problems. People were concerned, for example, with the energy requirements, but Microsoft, not themselves, but they had another company, Constellation Energy, I believe, that's doing it, but they've rebooted a nuclear power plant on the 3 Mile Island. And it sounds like all of that will go towards powering the AI data centers for Microsoft. So is that company likely to run into an energy crunch anytime soon? Maybe not, I would say. So he continues, we can say a lot of things about what may happen next, but the main one is that AI is going to get better with scale. More data, more compute, more energy, more data centers, and that will lead to meaningful improvements to the lives of people around the world. AI models will soon serve as autonomous personal assistants who carry out specific tasks on our behalf, like coordinating medical care on your behalf. At some point further down the road, AI systems are going to get so good that they will help us make better next generation systems and make scientific progress across the board. We're beginning to see kind of early proto versions of some of this stuff already. Technology brought us from the Stone Age to the agricultural age and then to the industrial age. From here, the path to the intelligence age is paved with compute, energy, and human will. If we want to put AI into the hands of as many people as possible, we need to drive down the cost of compute and make it abundant, which requires lots of energy and chips. If we don't build enough infrastructure, AI will be a very limited resource that wars get fought over, and that becomes mostly a tool for rich people. That's troubling and a little bit scary, but certainly if AI is like oil for the however X number of previous decades that we've had, certainly we'll see violence. We'll see it go into the hands of the powerful people, of the rich people. There's already a lot of tension in China and Taiwan. Taiwan is one of the world's biggest producers of these advanced AI chips. So he continues, we need to act wisely, but with conviction. The dawn of the intelligence age is a monumentous development with very complex and extremely high stakes challenges. It will not be an entirely positive story, but the upside is so tremendous that we owe it to ourselves and the future to figure out how to navigate the risks in front of us. A lot of people have sort of complained and criticized Sam Altman for not talking about the downsides as much anymore. And I think that's not quite the case. I think he does. He just doesn't like people taking some quotes out of context and blowing them up into something else. But I think he does note his concern about stuff. Like here he says, it will not be an entirely positive story. This is kind of what I've been saying from the start of this channel. I think that the long-term outlook is a positive one for humanity, for all of us. But in terms of like the short term, the medium term outlook, the transition before we had AI to when the world has AI, I don't know. It might get bumpy is what I have always said. And I think he's kind of saying the same thing. It will not be an entirely positive story. Bad things will happen. But the upside is so tremendous that we can't just, sit this one out. Like, oh, well, this AI thing looks nice, but let's just put on the back burner. We're not ready for it yet. That's not really an option. He continues, I believe that the future is going to be so bright that no one can do it justice by trying to write about it now. In his Moore's Law for Everything, he describes a situation where it's, if you imagine like the cost of housing, the cost of food, the cost of education, the cost of medicine, the cost of all of that getting cut in half every 2 or 3 years. So now if it costs you $70,000 to live and breathe and eat and have housing and a car and whatnot, 2 years from now, it only costs $35,000 in the same sort of, in real terms, in the same amount of money, right? 2 years later, it's only $17,000. Then whatever, it's $8,000, $4,000, $2,000. What does that world look like? I mean, I'm sure we'll still find stuff to complain about. I have no doubt of that. But there's going to be a lot less suffering. There's going to be a lot more prosperity. As Sam Altman puts it, a defining characteristic of the intelligence age will be massive prosperity. Although it will happen incrementally, astounding triumphs such as fixing the climate, establishing a space colony, and the discovery of all physics will eventually become commonplace. With nearly limitless intelligence and abundant energy, the ability to generate great ideas, and the ability to make them happen, we can do quite a lot. As we have seen with other technologies, there will also be downsides. And we need to start working now to maximize AI's benefits while minimizing its harms. As one example, we can expect this technology to create a significant change in the labor markets, both good and bad. In that scenario with the cost of living, the cost of everything gets, cut in half every few years. One of the big drivers for that is the biggest cost for a lot of things, like when you go to the hospital or you need a house built. Generally, one of the biggest costs is human labor. So the dropping in price of everything will be in large part driven by sort of the cost of human labor approaching zero. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It's obviously both, depending on how we manage it. It could be a horrendous thing if we mismanage it. It could mean, starvation, riots, whatever, right? What happens if everyone's out of a job all of a sudden? That does not end well. We need some sort of a system to handle that transition, right? So he's saying this will have a significant change in labor markets in the coming years, but most jobs will change more slowly than most people think. And I have no fear that we'll run out of things to do, even if they don't look like real jobs to us today. Back in the days when I first heard about these Twitch streamers that just kind of play video games all day and stream it to millions of followers and make millions of dollars doing it, I was a little bit surprised. I was like, that's not a real job. I don't think that anymore because, if you live in a glass house and all that, meaning what I do isn't that dissimilar from what they're doing. It's a stone's throw away, if you will. He continues, people have an innate desire to create and be useful to each other. And AI will allow us to amplify our own abilities like never before. As a society, we will be back in an expanding world, and we can again focus on playing positive-sum games. I got to give credit to David Shapiro for saying this in one of his live streams that he did a while back, I think. He was saying that now and in the years before, a lot of the stuff that we did, it was kind of like PvP, player versus player, if you will, right? So in the stock market, if I make money, someone loses. If I have a positive stock trade, someone's on the other side of that for whom that was negative. So it's like the money goes from them to me. It's a zero-sum game. For every dollar won, there's a dollar lost for somebody else. With AI, there's a chance that it will be more like PvE, using World of Warcraft terms or MMORPG terms, meaning players versus environment, where we all kind of band together and work together against something, against a problem or, like the environment, like solving physics, solving cancer, solving poverty, etc. By all us joining forces, we are better off than if we were trying to do it on our own. We don't have to fight against our teammates, around the people against us. We don't have to take from them. If we band together and focus on a shared objective, everyone benefits more than if we were all just, trying to kill each other. Sam continues, many of the jobs we do today would have looked like trifling wastes of time to people a few hundred years ago. But nobody's looking back at the past wishing they were a lamplighter. If a lamplighter could see the world today, he would think the prosperity around him was unimaginable. If you think about it, most of us probably live with more prosperity than a lot of the medieval kings did. We have AC, indoor plumbing, and we live past 40. There were places where they wouldn't name their kids until they were like a certain age, just because then it was more likely that they were going to survive. So like, you made it to 4, you are now Bobby. But your younger brother who's 2, we don't want to get too attached. We just don't know where this is going yet. And that wasn't that long ago. Sam continues, and if we could fast forward 100 years from today, the prosperity all around us would feel just as unimaginable. Just think about safe and effective gene therapy. You can control your speed, your health, your outlook, your energy, your muscle mass, your fat mass, bone density, maybe even intelligence. Just that alone would be a complete game changer. By the way, AI and genomics seem to be like the perfect fit. In genomics, we have massive amounts of data that we don't really understand how it works. I mean, we do a little bit here and there, but a lot of it is we don't get it. We don't understand the underlying rules for that data distribution. Guess what's really good at figuring that stuff out? It's neural nets, it's AI. And that's why genomics and proteomics, right? So this idea of creating, understanding proteins and their functions like AlphaFold and all those other companies are doing, why it can be so massive. Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind, he had an interview, and this is not a person that's prone to hyperbole. He doesn't hype things up that much. He's a fairly like reserved person. Like when he says something, he tends to mean it. He's not a hype guy. And he said that it's possible that within the next decade, we will solve all disease. Not 100 years from today, in the next decade. I believe he said in the next 1 or 2 decades, right? So 10 to 20 years, we will solve all disease. That's quite a statement, isn't it? I'll leave this there, and I'm just going to play a quick clip by Andrej Karpathy about where AI could take us if you just think through it and assume an exponential improvement, an exponential increase from here. Because to me, what Sam Altman's saying here, what Andrej Karpathy is saying in the clip, to me, it has the same effect as looking at the Milky Way at night if you've ever been fortunate enough to be somewhere without light pollution, away from cities, away from artificial lights. A few months ago, I was driving through Death Valley at night, 2, 3 in the morning, and I pulled over. I had to take a biological break, if you will. It was pitch black. I got out of my car and I looked up and I almost fell over. It felt like I was pulled into this vast expanse, this infinity. It was the Milky Way. There was no lights around for hundreds of miles. There's no settlements, no cities, nothing. It's called Death Valley. Actually, I think I just said it was pitch black. It wasn't pitch black. It was dark, but you can see everything. You can see the road, the landscape. It was like, if it's like a full moon out, you're outside, you can still see everything. It's not pitch black. But when I looked up, you see the universe, basically. And it kind of does something to your brain. You kind of understand your position in it, how insignificant some of the things are. And that's why statements like this really hit me hard, because they kind of trigger something similar. We had, the human history, in which we slowly, little by little, pieced some things together, right? Some technology. Eventually, we had the printing press that allowed that information to flow easily. Then we had the internet, which, took it to the next level, so to speak. And eventually we figured out how to melt sand, add some stuff to it, arrange it with astonishing precision at extraordinarily tiny scales into computer chips. If you're not aware, we are as close as physically possible in connecting some of those chips. Like they're measured in how many atoms are between the chips. Like we're bumping up against like atoms. Like we can't make it smaller because like atoms stop. Like there's a physical limit and we're there. Right, here's an article from Time. Scientists have made computer chip transistors just 1 atom thick. This is breaking news from 2015, right? But we were able to run energy through it, electricity, and we end up with systems capable of creating increasingly capable artificial intelligence, right? So the compounding scientific discovery got us here, and now we're starting another compounding sort of run, but now with artificial intelligence, with this sand that can think and can improve its own thinking abilities. And so another like compounding sort of a loop begins again. Where does it end? We have no idea. But here's Andrej Karpathy with an interesting take.
So, we're famously described often as a biological bootloader for AIs. Mm-hmm. And that's because humans, we're an incredible biological system and we're capable of computation. And so basically, it does seem like synthetic intelligences are kind of like the next stage of development. And I don't know where it leads to. Like at some point, I suspect the universe is some kind of a puzzle, and these synthetic AIs will uncover that puzzle and solve it. It is really interesting to think about like what the puzzle of the universe is. Did the creator of the universe give us a message? Like, for example, in the book Contact, Carl Sagan, there's a message for humanity, for any civilization in digits, in the expansion of pi in base 11 eventually, which is kind of interesting thought. Maybe we're supposed to be giving a message to our creator. Maybe we're supposed to somehow create some kind of a quantum mechanical system that alerts them to our intelligent presence here. Because if you think about it from their perspective, it's just, say, like quantum field theory, massive, like cellular automaton-like thing. And like, how do you even notice that we exist? You might not even be able to pick us up in that simulation. And so how do you prove that you exist, that you're intelligent and that you're part of the universe?
So this is like a Turing test for intelligence from Earth?
Yeah. Or maybe the puzzle is just to just break out of the system and just, stick it to the creator in some way. Basically, like if you're playing a video game, you can somehow find an exploit and find a way to execute on the host machine. So I think like some of these synthetic AIs will eventually find the universe to be some kind of a puzzle and then solve it in some way. And that's kind of like the end game somehow.
Do you often think about it as a simulation, or the universe being a kind of computation that might have bugs and exploits?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Is essentially?
I think it's possible that physics has exploits and we should be trying to find them. Arranging some kind of a crazy quantum mechanical system that somehow gives you buffer overflow, somehow gives you rounding error in the floating point. I think, by the way, it's going to have to be some kind of a super intelligent AGI of a third generation. Like we're building the first generation AGI,
Third generation. Yeah, so the bootloader for an AI, that AI will be a bootloader for another AI.
Better AI, yeah.
And then there's no way for us to introspect like what that might even...
I think it's very likely that these things, for example, like say you have these AGIs, it's very likely that, for example, they will be completely inert. I like these kinds of sci-fi books sometimes where these things are just completely inert. They don't interact with anything. And I find that kind of beautiful because they've probably figured out the meta game of the universe in some way, potentially. They're doing something completely beyond our imagination. And they don't interact with simple chemical life forms. Like, why would you do that?
So this is the post on X by Sam Altman, The Intelligence Age. I'll leave a link down below. I Rule the World says, my best writing so far. AI Safety Memes mentions that Sam no longer talks about the downsides. So the downside risks that you said were literally world ending. There's this quote where Sam Altman said, AI is probably going to kill everybody in the world, but we're going to have really great companies in the meantime. And this was quoted quite a bit. I looked into it. I feel like that's being taken out of context. I don't think that was his point. And that was from, I believe, 2015. It was before a lot of these large language models taking off. It was before Alpha Protein. It was before any of this. A lot of the people that work with OpenAI, I think Ilya, Sam Altman, they've all said that they're not as concerned about the Terminator scenario anymore. They all are still concerned about the transition. They're concerned about the labor force, the chance of abuse of this technology, of potentially bio threats, of how convincing that they'll be, right? So all these people, they're not saying it's all good, there's no worries. They're stating their worries very clearly. They're not underselling them. They're all saying that the Terminator scenario where it takes over the world and kills everybody, that's just not one of their concerns. And somebody did a TLDR, too long didn't read summary, and that is, don't die. Well said. Have a good sir. And I wish the same for you. Don't die. This is not a good time for it. Like the BG said, stay alive, or staying alive, whatever. With that said, my name is Wes Roth. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.